Welcome to episode number 5 of the Sizzle Basketball Podcast. Today, I'll be doing the two-team format again. And today I will be talking about the San Antonio Spurs and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So let me start out with the San Antonio Spurs in the West. The San Antonio Spurs are currently number 10 in the West. They're 26 and 28. So they're just sitting right on the very edge of that playing game tournament that will happen when this regular season's over. But this is a team that looked a lot better about a month or two ago. In the last couple of weeks have been really rough. They've been playing really bad, inconsistent. Really just since the All-Star break, they've been very inconsistent. It just seems as if they lose a lot of games that they should win. And their schedule's been a little tough the last couple of weeks as well, so that's definitely a factor. But they're also going into games now in the next couple weeks that they might have a better chance to win. The schedule is going to ease up a little bit. They're going to play Phoenix coming up, but then after that, the schedule will ease up. So yeah, I mean, the Spurs, I think it's shocking that they were even in the position they were in a month or two ago. For a while they were 7 in the West. I think a lot of people were very surprised about that. Now they've fallen off a little bit. You look at a guy like DeRozan, he's a free agent after this year. He's saying he doesn't really want to stay with them anymore, so that's a guy you're probably going to lose in the free agency. So that's why I was kind of surprised they didn't want to trade for him at the deadline, before the deadline. So, you're going to lose him for next to nothing, and he's a great player. He's played really well. He's played at pretty much an all-star level this season for this team. He's been their best player, but you still have a young future with Keldon Johnson and DeJounte Murray and Derek White, as well as Lonnie Walker. So you still have guys down on this team that are very young and have a lot of potential. You still have Popovich there. Obviously, he's a great coach. So nobody really knows what's going to happen with the Spurs moving forward. It's kind of tough to tell. So you have pieces that you can build around. Losing DeRozan is going to be tough. Let's see what kind of draft pick they end up getting. My guess is they don't make the playoffs, so that should give them, a lottery pick. Like I said, we just have to see what the future holds for San Antonio. But as for now, they're the 10th spot, so they would be in the play-in game as of now. So, they've dipped down a little bit, like I said, the last month or so. But maybe they got an easier schedule easing up, coming up pretty soon. So maybe they can rise back up in the standings. And this team is able to get to the playoffs. I don't really see them doing too much, in my opinion. But maybe I'm wrong. But I just don't see them doing too much. I think a lot of their guys are too young, right? And they haven't had too much playoff experience. So a little more playoff experience would help, in my opinion. So a lot of talent in San Antonio, for the young guys that a lot of people haven't really noticed quite yet, but just really unpolished. So, but actually the first guy I want to start with to talk about is Keldon Johnson and the season he's had. He's shown he can be a great leader for this team, right? He's young, but he's showing great leadership skills, number one. Number two, he is working on his three-point jumper, which kind of came and went last year. This year it's coming and going a little bit too, but it's a little more there, more consistently. So Keldon Johnson, the guy to look out for. He's a great rebounder. He's an improved defender. He's got a really quick first step. He can get to the rim, right? He's a very young guy in his second season now, and he has taken the leap from last year to this year in terms of scoring, three-point shooting, defense, rebounding, right? He's taken the leap that a lot of guys can't take going into their second year. So he's a guy you want to look out for the next couple of years. He's a great young player. He's motivated. You can tell he's really focused on winning, and he's really focused on getting his game better. And it'd be really interesting to see what Keldon Johnson's able to do. He's one of my favorite young players in the league. I think he has a lot of potential. A lot of people don't know who he is quite yet, but I think people will soon start to figure out who he is and start to really realize how good he is at this young of an age. DeJounte Murray is another guy who has had a really improved season compared to what he did last year. This is probably DeJounte Murray's best season. Not probably, actually, it is his best season to date. He's playing really well. He's still an All-NBA defensive player. It'll be interesting to see if he gets on one of those teams this year. He's an improved playmaker. He still needs a little work with the shooting, but he's a guy who this organization, to me, seems like they're building around him. He's the guy that they seem like they're looking at and saying, okay, you're the guy we want, to build around, and we want to, be able to take games over down the stretch here for the Spurs. So he's only 24. He's got a lot of years of development still. He's getting better every year. This is his best year of his career to date. Just a guy, if he can develop a little bit better of a three-point jumper, he can be a guy who can average 20 plus with 7 assists, 6 rebounds, and be a all-NBA defensive player and be an efficient scorer. And he also doesn't turn it over too much. So no, this is the guy for sure who this team would look at and say, okay, we have him in our future plans, and he's the guy. Him and Keldon Johnson are probably the two guys that this team wants to build around. So definitely a little bit of a bright future for the Spurs, I would say, in my opinion. Just a team that needs to get through the hump. They got rid of Aldridge, obviously. We know Aldridge retired, but they got rid of Aldridge at the trade deadline. Now DeRozan's going to leave, so you're going to get rid of a couple of the vets, and now you're going to go 100% young and then try to base that off of draft picks for the next couple of years to fill out the rest of your team and free agency. Because San Antonio is a desirable location for free agents. I mean, you're in Texas with no state tax. You're in Texas you're in San Antonio where they have proven that they can build a great organization. They have I should say probably arguably the best coach of all time for the Spurs there in Greg Popovich. So they have a great system, they have a great team, a great organization, and they have a good young core of players. So definitely an intriguing free agency destination for players in the next couple of years. So, the Spurs continue to build around DeJounte Murray and Keldon Johnson and other guys like Derek White and Lonnie Walker. They can be really good in a couple of years. Now let me move on and talk about Derek White, who has been really inconsistent back and forth this season. He's been a guy who has been really good one night and then really bad the next night. He's scoring more a game this year. So, that's a plus, but the shooting percentages are way down. He's like down 5 or 6%. He's shooting like 40% field goal and then like 34%, 33% from three. So those numbers have been down. Defensively, he's been a little worse. But he's a guy who I think maybe when DeRozan leaves, it'll open it up more for Derek White to expand his game and to show everyone how good he is, right? Because he'll be able to have the ball in his hands more, he'll score more, he'll play make more. So Derek White's a guy that you can't give up on quite yet. Yeah, he's been a little inconsistent this year. Scoring's up, but he's just been inconsistent in terms of field goal percentage. It's been down from last year, and defensively too. But he's a guy you can't quite give up on yet. He's a guy that still needs a little more developmental years. He has a lot of potential in his game, in my opinion. He's only 26 years old, so he's got a little time still. But he's a guy who can be a very good player in this league as well. And then, I want to talk a little bit about Lonnie Walker, too. He's been much better this season. Looking at the numbers, obviously, not just the numbers, but I've watched a lot of Spurs games this year, and I watched last year, too, and he's been much better. So he's a guy who's in his third year now, still very young. A lot of people think he's older than that. He's still very young. He's only 22. He still has a lot of potential. He's an improved shooter. He's an improved defender. He still needs a lot of work on the defensive end, but he's improved. He's a freak of an athlete. He can get to the rim, right? So he's a guy that this team is going to look at along with Derek White, Keldon Johnson, and DeJounte Murray in the next couple of years and say, okay, these are the guys we can build around, and these are the guys we feel like we can be successful around if we can get a couple more free agency pieces or draft picks. So, with that being said, Lonnie Walker is another guy, that's a bright future to this team and has a really good future in this league. So Lonnie Walker's a guy you got to keep your eye out for. He's a guy who tends to show flashes and then disappear. This year he's been a little more consistent with that than what he has in his previous 2 years before this. So, time is the teller here to see how good Lonnie Walker will be in his career, and hopefully he can keep taking a jump next year in the continuing years. And if he can do that, I have no doubt he'll be a great player in this league because he's very talented, and he seems like he's a hard worker as well. So another guy that the Spurs look at, along with the other two guys I mentioned with Keldon Johnson and DeJounte Murray, that have a bright future with this team. So, those are guys you want to keep an eye on if you're San Antonio. Now, you still have Rudy Gay, right? Rudy Gay is still on this team. Rudy Gay is 34 years old now. So he's a vet that, you weren't quite able to get rid of at the trade deadline. So he's a guy that, if I'm San Antonio, you want to get a guy like that out of town, right? No disrespect to Rudy Gay. He's had a great career. He's a great, he's still a pretty solid player. But he's a guy that you would rather have on a team like the Lakers or the Heat or the Clippers or Utah, a team that's ready to compete, than have on a team that's really kind of just looking to rebuild and build around 3 young guys that they have and say, okay, we want the vets to go because we want these 3 guys to develop their games and to get better year in and year out. and this is our only chance to win down the line, right? So, Rudy Gay is a guy that is an unrestricted free agent this year, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with Rudy Gay. But if I'm San Antonio, definitely a guy you would want to leave town and, go enjoy the rest of his career with a championship team, because you're trying to rebuild and you're trying to get younger and better. So, that's a guy you want to try to move on for, in my opinion. So let's see what the Spurs do there. Jakob Poeltl has been another guy who has been great for this team. I mentioned him a little earlier on the podcast. He's been unreal defensively this season, right? He's an improved offensive player too. He rebounds well. He's a guy, at 25 years old too, who this team could build around as well. And this team could look and say, okay, he can be our fourth or fifth best player. So Jakob Poeltl, I've been very impressed with how well he's played this year. I didn't think he was as good on the defensive end. I knew offensively he had a little bit of potential in his game, but defensively he's been unreal this season. And it's been really cool to see his development on the defensive end of the floor. And he's a guy who in a couple of years can be an all-NBA defensive guy. In my opinion, he has that kind of potential. So let's see what the Spurs do with Jakob Poeltl. Let's see if they have him in their future plans, or if this is a guy that, they plan on moving on from. He doesn't become an unrestricted free agent until 2023. So they have him for a little while so they can sit on him and see if this is a guy they want to keep in their future plans, or this is a guy they want to trade, because they could probably get something decent back for a trade too. But this is the guy, in my opinion, that I would want to keep on to if I'm San Antonio. I'm going to wrap it up here with the Spurs in a minute, but this is a team who, like I said, is now number 10 in the West, right? They were sitting at 7 for a while, but the last month has been kind of weak. They've been losing games that they should be winning, but the upcoming schedule is a little easier. So let's see what they do with that. Let's see how they respond to the pressure, because now, most games are going to be must-wins, whereas earlier in the season you could drop a couple here and there and it wasn't as big of a deal. Now you're going to have must-win games at that 10 spot. You want to try to keep that 10 spot at least, right, for the time being. There are 2 games above New Orleans. New Orleans is 11, so you don't want to go down to 11, because if you go down to 11, you're not even going to be in the play-in game at all. So your season's really going to be a wash. So keep an eye out for San Antonio, and let's see what they're able to do for the rest of the season until the end of May. So that's going to wrap it up for the Spurs part of the segment, and now I'm going to go into the second part of the segment, and I will talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference. So this season for Cleveland has been a real struggle. They've had a tough time winning games. Right now they're 20-35. They're 13th in the East, right? They started the season pretty well, maybe the first month or so, but they've really steadily declined since then. They got rid of Kevin Porter a couple months ago, with the locker room issues. That was a guy who was looked at to be a big piece of this team moving forward in the future. And now he's in Houston. He's thriving in Houston. I'll talk about him when I do the Rockets podcast. I'll talk about him. But let's talk about Colin Sexton for a minute. He's had a great season, but still the same thing people will come at him, for the way he plays based on one thing. He's still not a great playmaker. I know he plays at 2, but he's playing next to Garland, who's a good playmaker. You can give him a little bit of a pass there, but he's a guy who really is a point guard in my opinion, even though he plays at 2, so he should learn how to develop his passing a little more. But in my opinion, that will come with time and a little more knowledge of the game, right? But in terms of a scorer, he's one of the better scorers we have in the league. He's an unreal scorer. He can score from all 3 areas of the court, mid-range, 3, inside. He's got a really quick first step. He's a good decision maker in terms of what shots to take and what shots not to take. He doesn't have a lot of nights where he shoots poorly. He's going to give you at least 24, 25 every single night. Some nights he gives you 30, some nights he gives you 40. So with Colin Sexton, he's a great scorer. And now for Cleveland, it's about surrounding guys around him that will really work for them, right? And that will kind of be able to improve Sexton's game, right? They need a couple more scores around Sexton, so Sexton, when he has the ball in his hands, he can become the better playmaker that I just talked about a minute ago, right? That's the goal. You want Sexton to become a solid playmaker who can average 5+ assists a night, because you have Garland who passes the ball well, who averages 5 or 6 assists a night. Now you add Sexton into that equation, and now you have a really good passing backcourt who can get other guys involved and get other guys better. So really for Cleveland, it's also going to be about putting other guys around Sexton that he can get involved and that he can, trust them when he gives them the ball, right? So that's going to be a big thing for Cleveland moving forward. Now let me talk about Darius Garland, who in my opinion this is just my personal opinion. A lot of people overlook him, right? A lot of people don't really look at him as that great of a player. He's in his second year. I think Darius Garland has taken a huge step forward this season. He's averaging 17 a game. He's missed a decent amount of time, but, that's something that I think we've seen a lot this year with a lot of players have missed a lot of time. So I'm not too worried about that, in my opinion, but he's a guy who averages 6 assists, 17 a game, right? And I've seen a lot of Cavaliers games, and, he's very efficient from three. He's not a great defender. He needs a little work on that end of the floor, but he's a very efficient three-point shooter, right? He takes the right shots. He's got a very good handle on him, right? He's got a great mid-range jumper, solid three-point shot, and he can get to the rim. He's got a quick first step. So he's a guy who, in his second year, he's only 21 years old. He's going to have a long future ahead of him with this Cleveland team, and I like the Sexton Garland backcourt. I think it's a great backcourt, and I think it's going to work out really well. But like I said, once Sexton takes his game to the next level and improves the passing ability, that's when this backcourt's going to be even scarier, right? This is one of the youngest backcourts in the league, and they play at a high level every night. Sexton's 22, Garland's 21, right? You have one guy in Sexton, like I said, who averages 24 a game, and then a guy in Garland who can develop into an even better scorer, in my opinion, who's a solid playmaker, who doesn't turn it over too much. So, two positives there from Cleveland. Their backcourt's very good, and it's young. So, just to see those guys take the next step so they can become star players, which they can definitely become, that will be when Cleveland takes their game to the next level as well. Let's talk about Isaac Okoro for a minute. He went number 5 in this past year's draft, right? He's the rookie for this team. He's the main rookie for this team. And he has been a little inconsistent, but he shows a lot of flashes on the defensive end, right? We know coming in out of Auburn what kind of defense he can bring to the table for this Cleveland team. And he's a perfect number 3, in my opinion, for this team moving forward with Sexton and Garland, because he's a guy who, within a little bit of an improved jumper, right, which I think he will get in the next year or two, he's a guy who can lock up or make nights tough on opposing 2s, 3s, and 4s. He can guard, actually, I'll rephrase that. He can guard 1 through 4, right? He's just not quite big enough to guard 5. In my opinion, he's only 6'5", but he can guard 1 through 4. He's physical. He's a good post defender. He's a great perimeter defender already in this league. He just needs to work on his 3 shot, right? It's just a little inconsistent from 3-point range, shooting around 30%. But yeah, he can get to the rim well. He's got a decent mid-range jumper. So once he can develop that 3-point shot in his game, I think he can be a great player for the team, a great two-way player. He'll be their best two-way player for this team, in my opinion, once he can develop his 3-point shot in the next upcoming years. So, like a lot of other young guys in this league, that's going to be the key factor in determining what kind of player Isaac Okoro is going to be, because he's shown a little bit of flash at the playmaking area, right? He can pass a little better than people think, and he's the kind of guy who can maybe average 4 or 5 assists a night in a couple years, which will really be a help to this team as well. So, especially if Sexton develops his passing, you have 3 guys who are legitimately good passers on this team, so that will really help as well. Jared Allen, I want to talk about him really quick, right? He was a guy who came to this team at the trade deadline, and he has been great so far for this team. Been a guy who on offense has shown, flashes to be great on that end of the floor, right? He's got an improved mid-range jumper. We know he's really physical down low. He's athletic. He can get up. So offensively, he's shown a lot of potential this year. He's expanded his range a little bit. He still can't shoot the 3 ball, but he's got the mid-range game in his arsenal now, a little more consistent. So that's something to keep an eye for. And we know defensively, he's a guy who is one of the best defenders at the center position in the league. He's a guy, in my opinion, who in a couple years can win Defensive Player of the Year. Right? He's a guy who's a solid rebounder, but still needs a little work on the rebounding end. But he's a guy who I can look at and say he could be the next Rudy Gobert type of player, right? If he can rebound a little bit better and learn how to be a little more physical down low, even though he is still physical down low, just be a little more physical down low and continue to take the steps forward on the defensive end as well, which we know he's one of the better defenders, as I mentioned a minute ago already, and he's only 22 years old. This is his 4th season in the league, so a lot of game can be brought out of Jared Allen. And like I said, I think he can win Defensive Player of the Year one day. I really do. It might be a couple more years, but he's a guy who has a great potential and a great future with his team, and a guy that this team needs to make sure they hang on to and don't get rid of. He's a guy who will become a restricted free agent next year or after the season's over. And I've heard a lot of inside information that they're expecting the Cavaliers to offer him a $100 million extension, if not more, almost 140. So I like that move. It might seem like it's a little high price-wise, but like I said, this is a guy who can develop into arguably the best defender at the center spot and maybe be like a Rudy Gobert with a little bit of a mid-range jumper in his game. So, this is a guy who would pay a lot of money. I think he's great for Sexton and Garland too, to help those two guys develop their passing in the pick and roll. Right, we know Garland's a good passer, but it will help Sexton develop his passing, not just now, but in the next upcoming years. In the pick and roll, it will help Sexton really get an ability to run the pick and roll because, Jared Allen's a guy who can go up. So he can, he's a guy you can throw lobs to, and he's physical down low, so he's a great pick and roll partner for this team. So, Jared Allen's going to help his team in many different ways. He's a guy that they need to keep, like I said. And that extension, I hope that extension comes for him because I think he deserves it, and this team should do it because it'll be the right move for Cleveland, in my opinion, as well. The last guy I want to get into really quick before I wrap today's podcast up is Kevin Love, right? And this has been a really rough year for Kevin Love, to say the least. The last couple of years have been super injury prone, right? He's only played 12 games this year. And in those 12 games he's played, he just doesn't look like he's the same player, right? He's now approaching, this is his 13th season. He's 32 years old. So now it's kind of getting to the point where it's, he's kind of ready, I think, to throw in the towel kind of soon here in the next 3 or 4 years. And he's another guy, like I mentioned in the Spurs segment of the podcast, that, he's an older vet. He's getting towards the last couple of years of his career. So this is a guy, if you're Cleveland, you want to just move him to a team that, is ready to win, right? You want to give Kevin Love the respect because he's been with this organization for a while. He's been a great player, very respectful. So you want to give him the respect and, send him to an organization he wants to play for and then move on and say, okay, we have a couple young guys that are, pieces we can build around. So let's build around them and move on from the vets, right? And it's not even that. Kevin Love's getting paid $31 million a year this year, $31 million a year next year. And then he'll also be getting paid $31 million a year again the year after that. So he'll be an unrestricted free agent in 2023. So this is the guy from Cleveland I'm looking to trade as soon as I can. Right when this offseason hits, I'm looking to trade him because it might be tough to find trade partners for Kevin Love making that much money a year based on his, downplay and based on his injury risk. But I think there's a team out there that might move him or might try to go for him. Cleveland already bought out the Andre Drummond contract. So they're having to pay that contract just for the rest of this year. So that's not terrible, but still, they're still paying it for the rest of this season. They'll clear up a good amount of money after this season, right, when they get rid of that Andre Drummond deal. But, you're still going to be paying Kevin Love all that money. So maybe they buy him out and they only get to pay him for the rest of or part of next year. But really the goal, I think, would be to trade him in the offseason so you don't even have to pay him out for 1 year because that's a lot of money to pay out for a year, right? So the goal would be to trade Kevin Love and try to get back a young guy maybe or just, draft picks, right? Because, Kevin Love may not even draw attention of a young guy. He probably won't. So I'll take that back. Really just draft picks. So maybe try to get back a late first rounder. That's probably the best thing you'll get. Early second rounder. At least try to go for a late first rounder, a mid first rounder, right? And maybe you can go get somebody good because you're going to have a good draft pick too in this draft as well. You're going to have a top 10 pick. Imagine if you can go get a pick like 18 or 19. You can have 2 picks in the first round or in the top 20. It's a pretty good deal there, in my opinion. So definitely a guy I would want to move based on his contract and based on his age, based on his performance, and just based on where this team is trying to move moving forward, right? They're trying to get younger. They're trying to, keep the young guys and build around them and get rid of the veterans, kind of like San Antonio is trying to do right now. So Kevin Love's a guy that, you want to keep your eye out for in this offseason to see if Cleveland is able to move him or not. But yeah, let me just wrap it up with this with Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland is a team that has struggled this year, as I mentioned earlier, right? But they're a team that has a little bit of a brighter future than people might think. They have a couple young guys in Sexton and Garland and Isaac Okoro, as well as Jared Allen, who show flashes, of being really good players in this league, and they can be good players. Sexton's the closest one to being a star player. He's not there yet, but he's the closest out of all those guys. But Jared Allen will be there soon, in my opinion. So will Garland, and Isaac Okoro can be an unreal two-way player in this league. So definitely a team to keep your eye out for in the next couple of years. They may make some noise next year, in my opinion, and they may make a push for the playoffs next year. So let's see what they do. Moving forward with this team will be really interesting. So that will wrap it up for episode number 5 of the Sizzle Basketball Podcast. Make sure you tune into the episodes. We're going to drop at least 2 podcasts a week. Some weeks I'll drop 3, right? Just depending. We're going to have special guests coming up soon and everything. So please make sure you tune in. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast.